topic. We will look at the experiences, as you might have heard while we were organizing the speakers. We're going to have some experiences from the University of Davis, from Denmark. We're also going to look at the experience from the Dominican Republic and a new tool developed by FAO as that it, as presented by Dr. Rojas. And so we're going to show you different experiences in this rapid risk assessment that we believe is going to be of great use at the national level in all of your countries to justify the funds, to address the outbreaks, to look at the impact that this emerging and re-emerging diseases may have in our countries, these transboundary diseases such as African swine fever. My name is Erika Calderon. I work for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, and we are in charge of the coordination of these webinars. We have had them for almost 2 or more than 2 years now in trying to help you prepare and have a good response and surveillance to, African swine fever as well as other transboundary diseases. We have Dr. Campuzano with us today as well, who is helping us with the coordination of these webinars. This is all coordinated within GFTATS, and this is an interagency effort by FAO, OMSA, CARIBET, CAPSA, USDA, OIRSA, WOAH, among others. And so we're going to start today. Let me remind you that this webinar is being broadcasted via ICA's web, uh, social media in Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French. And this webinar will have the characteristic of having a Q&A session at the end of the presentations by panel members. So please think of your questions and type them up in the chat box. We have two chats, the regular chat and the Q&A chat. So we will make sure the questions are answered by the panel members. And please identify yourselves. Let us know what countries you're from and what organizations you represent. That is very important for us to keep record of who is participating in all these webinars. We are also going to send you via the chat box a survey, which is truly important for this interagency team, because we want to monitor the impact that these webinars have had in all of you. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first presentation by Dr. Francisco Calvo, a very brief presentation before we start with his presentation. Dr. Calvo is epidemiologist and veterinarian from San Jose, Costa Rica. He obtained his veterinarian degree at Universidad Nacional and also a veterinarian and economy degree in Utrecht, Netherlands, and a doctorate degree at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. His experience includes risk analysis, epidemiological modeling, and the control of surveillance systems and the application of geographical information in animal health. Today, he works as a veterinarian in epidemiology in the Danish Veterinary and Food Administration, where he applies a number of methods on epidemiology and risk assessment, looking at rapid risk assessment, biostatistics, and the geographical information systems within the division of health, animal health. So with this, we give the floor to Dr. Calvo. So, sir, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please. Well, thank you very much, Erika. It is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for your invitation. Good morning. I'm going to share my presentation. Just a moment, please. Can you see it? We see it, but it's not in presentation mode. There you go. Now we are in presentation mode. So the presentation I'm going to be giving you today has to do with rapid risk assessment that we use here in Denmark. And we're going to give the example for PPA because of the outbreaks of ASF, because of the outbreaks that we have here in Europe. So I'm going to give you some background and our uh, pork production, and then I'm going to go into this rapid risk assessment. So this is Denmark. As you can see, it's a very small country located between Sweden and Germany. This is Denmark. This is Belgium. This is Sweden. This is Denmark. This is the border, the only border that we have between Denmark and Germany. But where do we have our pig production? It's spread all over the territory. For us, it is very, very important to prevent the entry of African swine fever. And the use of rapid risk assessment has helped us greatly in taking action and making sure that we have an overview of what is happening in neighboring countries here in the EU. Our pig production in Denmark consists of around 1 million sows, of an average of 850 sows per farm, 34 million piglets per year, 19 million are slaughtered in Denmark, and 15 million of live piglets are exported. As you can see, this is a very important production for the economy of the country. 90% of pork meat is exported. We do not have pig importation. We are free from all diseases that are important for pigs that need to be notified to WHOA. And we have a high level of cooperation between farmers, and we have a backup from the government and the universities for the industry. And why is it so important for us, this disease? Because of the ASF situation in Europe. This is a map that I recently made that shows the situation of ASF in Europe between January 1st and July 8th of this year. Here you can see the new leap that the ASF did in Germany. For us, the likelihood of introduction is pretty low because of the mitigation measures that we have adopted, but I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But these are the areas that have a highest activity here in Germany, northern part of Italy, and also the situation that we have in the Balkans. Among the mitigation actions that we have adopted to prevent the entry of ASF to Denmark is that we first have that swill feeding is banned. It has been banned for many years. No import of live animals. We exterminated the wild boar in Denmark. We don't have any wild boar roaming free in Denmark. We do have uh, caged wild boar used for hunting, but it's not any wild boar that can leave the cages and roam freely in the territory. We also built a fence along the Danish-German border. We also have a system where all farms are registered, including the backyard farms, which have pretty much family production of pigs or non-commercial production of pigs, they may be called of some backyard farms. And all these farms are registered in our system, and we also have a system of traceability of all the animal movements. We also have high biosecurity at the farm level, and we have also carried out a number of leaflets to inform farm employers and hunters. And so we consider hunting of high risk for the introduction of of ASF. So we have developed this sort of information or leaflets and for hunters associations as well. And the industry also has another mitigation uh, action, which has to do with the cleaning and disinfection of trucks that come back to Denmark after transporting animals to other countries. So they leave, let's say, the pigs in Poland and Germany, and then they come back to Denmark. At the border, we do a thorough cleaning and disinfection of the trucks, an extra cleaning and disinfection. And if they have at areas to black areas or red areas, they have to stay in quarantine for 7 days if they come from a black area, as categorized by the industry, pig industry here in Denmark, and 48 hours if they come from a red zone. With regards to the how we carry out this rapid risk assessment, we base ourselves on the rapid risk assessment on the import risk analysis components of WOAH. So we do hazard identification, risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication, knowing that risk communication goes throughout this entire process, is present throughout the process. Within risk assessment, we have four parts. We have the entry assessment, exposure assessment, consequence assessment, and risk estimation. In the case of this rapid risk assessment, we are going to focus on early or entry assessment and exposure assessment. Another way to look at this is that when we do the entry assessment, we're going to look at the population of the sporting country or the source population or where the outbreak is taking place. And so something I forgot to mention is that we wrote this rapid risk assessment when there is a crisis, when there is an event, when there is an outbreak of ASF in Germany, for example, in a new state, or if it happens in another country, for example. So we are going to assess, we are going to identify different factors in these countries, such as where the outbreak took place, in what type of production. Have we sent trucks to that area? How near to that area have we sent trucks to? So we're going to identify all the different risk ways in which the ASF can come into Denmark through these different hazardous pathways. And when we look at exposure assessment, we look at our protection, at our susceptible population. So we analyze how the virus might enter into the different types of production, big production that we have, be it with high biosecurity farms or medium or low security or wild population. And then we also have to look at the mitigation actions like border controls or what I was mentioning about the cleaning and disinfection of the trucks by the industry at the German border. So these mitigation actions will reduce the likelihood of the introduction or entry of the disease, of the virus. So when we look at the entry assessment and exposure assessment, we'll look at the probability of introduction. And this probability of introduction will be estimated for each risk pathway that we identify. So, for example, we will identify these risk pathways. For example, semen, indirect transmission, like via hunters or people who do tourism and hunt. So they we may have a risk in their clothing, their boots, their equipment. Another risk pathway may be the import of live animals, the import of animal products, be it legal or illegal, wild animals, or other vectors for other diseases. And we're going to assess how this virus will go through this risk pathway, cross the border, entry Denmark, and see how they may actually reach the different types of productions that we have, pig production we have. So we're going to use a probability for introduction matrix, where we have the likelihood for exposure and likelihood for entry. We have also carried out a work together with the University of Copenhagen and the official laboratory here in Denmark. This is a consortium called DKVET, and this consortium between the university and the lab has a contract with the Danish government. We ask them questions, and among this, we ask for risk assessments. And so we look at this, we're going to ask for them during peacetime, and this is going to be done by Copenhagen or DKVET. So we're going to do this risk assessment rapid risk assessment, whenever there's a crisis, whenever there's some sort of threat for an outbreak, because there's an outbreak of this disease in a neighboring country. So this rapid risk assessment is qualitative in nature. So we're going to look at the qualitative data to estimate the likelihood of entry or introduction. So with the University of Copenhagen, we reach an agreement that whenever we ask them for an assessment, a risk assessment, or we ask them any question because we need the expert opinion, they use these levels to estimate the likelihood reduction based on EFSA in a qualitative manner. And we translate this to these levels, to these 4 levels, high, medium, low, and very low for our rapid risk assessment. So this is just an example to show you the communication that we have between the government, universities, laboratory, so that within Denmark, within these institutions, we can all speak the same language when we're talking about the likelihood or probability of introduction or risk estimation.
So when we do the rapid risk assessment, we would do this when we have an outbreak, which is of mandatory reporting, and an assessment has been made identifying that this disease has high consequences for Denmark. We do not do this for all diseases. We have a list of about 8 different diseases for which we carry out these rapid risk assessments. And in the European, that it is happening in the European or in the European Union or neighboring countries. Here we have an outline of how we decide what to do. There's an outbreak, for example, in the EU, in a new area, in a new country. So we will define the team that will be in charge of the risk assessment, at least 2 people. And we will identify all the different paths and the sources of information we need, WOA, scientific information, and since we have direct access to EU data, as well as the Traces, which is the platform where we have all the information about produce export and import. And we use that information all for our rapid risk assessment. Additionally, we identify whether we need information or expert opinion. And from there, we will pose a risk question, I guess, and we will send this to you, the University of Copenhagen, or to the consortium. After that, we will have an outbreak description, the disease description, its hazard, an outbreak description, why we are writing this report, and then we will assess each individual pathway of risk, and we will give it assign it a probability of introduction, and then we write the RRA report. Basically, the objective is to develop this report in a matter of 3 days, usually in 3 days. This week, in fact, we just published the first one on Lopiscariasis in Europe. This is the first one we draft, so it took us a week, but we have this range of trying to do it much faster, to have faster decisions and share this information with the higher level to identify where our resources must be focused to prevent the entry of the disease. Now, how do we write this or draft this report? The objective of the report when we implemented it, and well, this has already been standardized, obviously. The objective was to have a structured, systematic, transparent, and well-documented report describing the importance of the disease for which the report is being written. We will describe the current situation, where the outbreaks are occurring, what have you, and we will justify and explain the assessment for each pathway and assign it a probability of introduction. As I was saying, these are notifiable diseases with significant consequences for the country, or that is occurring in neighboring countries. We must consider the distance to Denmark, and we must have sufficient data. And if not, well, we'll have to contact the experts for them to provide us the rest of the information. So we have the report. The report will consist of several sections. It must have a date and a version of the report, obviously, as well as a title. This is an example of the rapid risk assessment for African swine fever. So we can see rapid risk assessment for the introduction of African swine fever into Denmark in relation to the ASF situation in Germany to June 16, 2024. That is a very important date because that is the date on which we collected all the data, and we are based on the data we have on that date. So the probability of introduction on that date specifically, because in a matter of 5 days, the situation can change and we would have to draft a completely new report. We also provide a summary and then a table with a list of the risk pathways and the probability of introduction We have a description of the pathogen, the hazard, the danger, the disease. This contains information about the epidemiology of the disease, what pathogen we are referring to, etc., etc. Then we express or describe the current situation and what is the foundation of this risk assessment, what the trigger of this report is. For example, in this case, It was the a jump of the virus from this eastern part of Germany to the western part, to the state of Hesse. So we describe where this wild boar was detected and the mitigation measures that Germany is currently implementing. And we will provide information as to whether this is a farm, the number of animals affected, how many cases, species affected, etc., etc. And then we will move into the assessment itself, the probability of entry and probability of exposure for each pathway.
De manera cualitativa,
So in
evaluar
qualitative terms, we will assess with the data available
si hemos tenido
to determine whether, what have you, there has been trade with the specific area, if we have sent trucks or vehicles to infected areas. And in the same manner, with the probability of exposure, we will consider our mitigation actions. We will describe them in the assessment and we will justify them. And then we will proceed to estimate the probability of introduction. As we can see here on this type of table here, we can see to the right, and we explain why. And it is also important to recall that we must consider uncertainty at all times. There are certain cases, there are times when the available data from our experts contain an uncertainty. So it is important to describe that uncertainty and take it into account because this could also change our estimation of the probability of introduction. And as I was saying, we will use qualitative terms, high, medium, low, very low for each one. This is an example of the ASF risk pathways for introduction into Denmark. As you can see, we use the levels that is used by the levels that are used by the laboratories and universities here in Denmark, and we refer to the qualitative levels that are described here. As you can see, the pathways we have so far, all of them described are within the very low range. But within this section, the most important, I guess, we would that would push us into the yellow section. The low is hunting tourism because we know that we have a lot of Danish nationals that travel to Cologne or to Germany, and they go out there and hunt. And we cannot be 100% sure that all these hunters really know how to protect their own biosafety in the right manner. We have no idea if all their equipment, their gear is clean, the boots, the dogs they use. We have no idea whether in the forests they were in contact with a corpse that has ASF. And so that is the uncertainty. And that is why we have defined this pathway as the most important one for us. And after that, we produce a series of recommendations as government and the references. And this is the last risk assessment for ASF here in Denmark. This was a confirmed outbreak in wild boar in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. And here we can see the table with the risk pathways I mentioned, each one with their possibility of introduction. And we implement this rapid risk assessment We have been implementing it in a standardized manner since about 2019. So we use this as a very important risk communication method. After all these years of drafting these reports, we already have cases of local newspapers, agricultural newspapers that use our rapid risk assessments to develop their own notes, and they share those with the public at large. And this type of communication really reaches the farmers, the producers, who are the people that we need to educate precisely so that they can understand the importance of this type of information. And with this, I end my presentation. If you have any question. Thank you very much, Dr. Calvo. Excellent presentation, very interesting. There are already a bunch of questions, but if this is agreeable, we will leave that for the panel. I do not know if you can stay. No, I know it is late for you up there. No problem. I can stay. Okay. We will leave the questions for the end. Okay. And the question panel. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So, without further ado, let us continue with the next presentation by Dr. Hernan Rojas. First, allow me to briefly introduce Dr. Rojas. Allow me. Dr. Rojas is a veterinary doctor, master and PhD in veterinary, and he is an expert in aquatic and ground land animal. He was head national director of the Development Agricultural Institute of Chile, also director of CERES, and is currently a consultant of animal health at FAO, supporting the African Swine Fever programs and avian influenza. With that, Dr. Hernan, the floor is yours to continue with your presentation. Dr. Calvo will have to stop sharing his screen so that Dr. Rojas can share his screen. There we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Dr. Rojas will talk about their tool. Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the organizers, Erika, and I would like to thank the FAO also for their organization and invitation. Firstly, my presentation will be to explain what this tool is that we are developing at FAO for the different countries. And based on the experience that we have had in the different countries of the region and the preparation phase, and with the support to the Dominican Republic, which Diego will elaborate on. We are facing a disease of global importance. We have a dozen countries that have reported African swine fever in different countries, continents, with the exception of Oceania. But now we will focus on the region to examine the outbreaks that continue active in the case of the island of La Hispaniola in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Today, we do not have official reports. It is very difficult to get updated information, although we know the virus continues to circulate. Despite the grand efforts by the country, the virus is still there in the Dominican Republic, with outbreaks that have continued, persisted since 2021. And that is fundamentally because of the structure itself of the productive chain. It is very complex, with a high proportion of producers and informal production, making it very difficult to control the disease. In view of that, the scenario is that we will very likely have a source of infection on the island for several months or years into the future. So that has led us to strengthen the work we are doing in the Dominican Republic, but also to uh, develop tools that will help us manage. And this is a minor difference, perhaps. We're not focusing on management itself, the management of the risk itself, based on a tool that will allow us to do the assessment. Now, what is the challenge here? On one hand, we have an infected country, the Dominican Republic and Haiti in this country, that we know are already infected, and we have a series of very different countries in the region, closer to the Dominican Republic, and others that are more distant, better prepared or less prepared. And as our colleague was saying, we we work with the infected country with the risk of generating of spreading this disease, and how the virus could leave the country and how it would be exposed to the susceptible population in disease-free countries in the region. So the question is, how can this happen? How does this generate and spread out? Since we are worried about what to do, not only knowing that the risk is present, but we want to know how the countries are prepared to mitigate these risks, both in the case of the Dominican Republic and, of course, the countries that are free of the disease. And we want to identify those aspects or things that could be done better. So this is the motivation to generate a tool that will allow the veterinary services in the region, with their own characteristics, to be able to better evaluate and focus their effort on improving the mitigation of such risks. So this tool, more than a rapid tool, has to be simple, flexible to the different situations in the different countries, and that focuses on managing the risks for the veterinary services. Countries want to know whether they are doing it right or whether they could do it any better. So that is what this work focuses on. This also facilitates public-private and public-public dialogue, identifying those measures that are public responsibility, but also measures that are for the private sector. Diego will talk about the importance of biosafety, and this is a fundamentally a private measure. So this basically encourages this type of conversation. And we say this is dynamic because this changes over time. And in the countries, since our countries in our region are very different, we have to have periodical updates. And then we have a more accurate assessment. And for this, we have this continuous improvement objective. Allow me to mention that 2 years ago, there was an assessment by FAO, handed by Angelo Fanghi, at a regional level, with a first assessment identifying some of these risk patterns. And we have used this as a foundation. So I recommend that you read that paper. Okay, let us see the foundation of this work. Okay, we will talk first about the country, the infected country, where the virus is circulating in the Dominican Republic. It could be the same in any other country, but here we have a structure, a productive structure, with the producers, basically small producers, the backyard producers. We have commercial producers also, where they exchange animals and individuals, and these animals go to the slaughterhouses to to be slaughtered and to sell that meat. And all this process leads to waste or swill that could go to for animal consumption or could be disposed of. So the circulating virus, we really have no idea of where it is. It moves around all these different pathways through live animals, meat, and waste and swill. And this is what is happening here in the country. So this country, in this case, as we can see in the green circles, generates a series of measures. They seek to identify the virus, generate biosafety measures for the farms, and at a more systemic level, And those measures are not always the most appropriate or are not best implemented. And that is part of the risk assessment we need to undertake. But not only do we generate the virus in this production chain, but it also leaves the country, so it is not, does not remain there. So we find the legal or illegal way in which these risky animals are leave the country through persons, through live animals, through meat. So we have this external spread risk. So if we look for the three countries, we have also identified, as our colleague was just saying a moment ago, here we have identified the most common pathways in which this could reach other countries by contraband, the importation through ships, aircraft, vehicles, passengers, and fomites also through contaminated materials. Uh, And those products or byproducts that are affected or contaminated also enter the productive chain in the countries, especially basically to the backyard uh, production area. These could be live animals or meat that come to a landfill or that becomes a swill and are in contact then with uh, other animals. And this whole chain is different from one country to another. That is why it is so important to characterize each one of the countries and the pathways of risk, as has been explained. But once again, we focus on the green points, the green dots, the management measures each one of those countries has. Very likely, well, the countries know this. They know the virus could come through one of these pathways, and for that, they establish a series of measures. So the focus of this assessment is to determine whether these measures being developed are appropriate or not for those risks we have identified. And that is what this assessment is all about. So with this, we will see that from the infected country, in this case the DR, we will have a pathway of animals, meat, the processed meat, persons, and some of these could come to any other country in the region, as we can see to the right. So the question is, what are those risks? Which ones? Which ones are those risks? And how risky are they? How important are they? But the major question is, are the preventive measures I have in my country, are they effective? I am interested in carrying out this evaluation in each one of these countries. And with this, the tool we are developing is basically to identify for the infected country, and that is the work we are doing with the FAO in the Dominican Republic. We identify all those risks of generation, that what causes the circulation of this disease, the risk of dispersion, and in each one of those, the evaluation or assessment of the efficacy uh, of it being spread out. And we identify the free countries, and we do this quarterly. There are 14 different items we examine, and in pilot countries, we are defining how often we will carry out this assessment. This is the rationale for this. Now, what is the concept behind all of this to focus on management? If I take any of these risk pathways, for example, imagine the entry of passengers, what have you, through the airport. The biggest risk will obviously depend on the origin. Suppose it comes from the Dominican Republic, and it will depend on the number of persons that are arriving. And this will show the risk. If I have no pathway, there will be a maximum risk that will determine the risk of this red line, which is the risk if I do not take measures. But if I do take measures, I apply a series of measures, X-ray, what have you, and I reduce this risk to what we have called current risk, the yellow line. where, however, during my assessment, I must determine that this is not fully effective because I am just at a current risk. I want to take it to the acceptable risk, the green line. And that difference will be because we have the measure or the coverage is very limited. I cannot reach all the passengers or the people are not well trained to take all these, gather all this information. That is why, for comparison purpose, I will have a series of more effective measures to try to limit that risk to an acceptable level. So this is the principle behind the methodology we are talking about. And this is for each one of the pathways. So another example here, border control in any country, checking passengers. What is the risk event, the pathway we are worried about? Well, the entry of passengers with potentially infected products of risk. For example, we have no idea of which products could be infected, but let us suppose that any of those could be infected. Okay, so the meat, for example, the frequency or magnitude, well, we're talking about 3,000 passengers per year from the infected country, and basically we just estimate 3,000 passengers. So with that, we will assign a weight to that. That will be determined by each country. We will develop a scale. We have proposed a scale, but each country will have to determine whether this is low frequency, what have you, 10 passengers or 10,000 passengers. And in this case, we will determine this is medium frequency, the efficacy of the measures in that country. For this risk, not, we evaluate as low or assess as low. And if we compare the frequency of that actual risk without measures, plus the efficacy of the measure, well, this shows us that there is a risk, a final risk. So I must be responsible for that pathway because the measures I am taking are not enough to manage the risks. I know this could lead, this could generate significant risks, and we must develop a risk matrix, and we match the risk of introducing or exposure, and we compare that to the efficacy of the measure, and we see if the frequency here was medium and the low efficacy was low. So this is in the area where, yes, it is a risk. So if, for example, if the efficacy had been high with the same frequency, the risk would be much lower. But as I had said several times,
The idea of all this is to have mitigation measures. So I'm going to look at all the measures that I would look out based on literature and recommendations and everything. And so I establish the characterization of said measures based on their efficiency. And so, for example, I could have that persuasive communication plus the caning brigades, plus the affidavit, plus the scanner, plus the physical inspection, plus the elimination and efficacy. I'll look at it and I can see whether the coverage is there or not, the quality, and we look at the level of efficacy. So if it exists, the coverage and the quality. So this helps us identify with the B where I have problems, where I have gaps, where I need to improve to be able to have my mitigation actions tackle the risks. So this is where we need to put things, resources to improve, whether if it's more coverage or whether it is to develop it or if it's a matter of quality. And another dimension, and let's continue with the same example. Let's say we have 3,000 passengers arriving at three different airports and they do not all behave the same. We have different number of passengers. Here we have one that has over 80%, 2,500 passengers. The inherent risk is high because of the number of people and the frequency, but the measures maybe are different in all airports. So in that same matrix for eval assessment can be carried out for each of the risks, and that's how it should be carried out. It's hard to do something generic. It's much better to do it by risk unit. And then maybe the risk is mitigated in airport 3. There is no high enough risk, and the frequency is low, the risk is low, etc. So now we can do this with exposure risk with the way we feed animals with meat products. So here this would be with swill. What is the frequency of the event? There are 30,000 of backyard farms with swill feeding. So here we have the risk. The frequency is high. The 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 measure efficacy is very low, and so the risk is very high. And here I have a number of measures: the risk communication, control of landfills, prohibition of feeding with swill, uh, biosecurity in the farms, etc., etc. So here we have a very low efficacy, and it tells me exactly where to invest. So here we have the different veterinary services who will be accompanying me, and oftentimes they ask you, do you have any regulation in force that may prohibit the use of swill? Or you may say yes, but that's not it. Maybe it's not done with the coverage that we wanted or with the quality that we want it to be. So that's why we need to have a fine-tuned assessment of all the different risk units. And after this, I can differentiate by region because this 30,000 backyard farms may be distributed in the entire country. So I can do this by region so we can have a more fine-tuned assessment for each of them and estimate the frequency and the efficacy of the measures as well. Finally, I can demonstrate that this is something that is easily understood. I'm going to look at the different risks for the different flows in the country with the infection or the outbreak, in this case, the Dominican Republic, and the country at risk in the region. And this may vary in time. And if I want to improve in time, the risk will need to be reduced because my measures are going to be better. So this is a sample for you to look at how simple it is. This is for the Dominican Republic. We are developing it together with a team from the Dominican Republic, where we look at all the flows and the measures that are important. First, the flows within the country for the generation risks, everything that requires generation. For T4 2024, we establish whether it's a risk or not based on the efficacy of the measure. And T1 2025, we're looking at the uh, we're looking at T2 2025. So in time, I can see how the variables vary. Here we have the efficacy for each of the points that is associated to all the measures to estimate whether the efficacy for that flow is the adequate one. Same thing, this is the exit variables. Here they look at the exit of these products, legally or illegally, towards the region, countries in the region. And then it also assesses the efficacy. Here we have the same for countries in the region that are free from the disease. We look at the flows as well there. We look at the entry of swill, uh, or also the income of via airplanes, via ships. We look at the entry of pigs to landfills or landfills, and if they're being fed with swill. And so we also look at the country to look at the exposure risk, which is the last contact that they have with the animals. For example, in the previous example, it was how they were handling the swill or trash. And so this is another example of another country. This is T4 2024, and the idea is to generate the different periods for 2025. So I'm going to conclude because you may all ask yourselves, what do I need as a country to do this? The idea here is for this to be done by the veterinary services, by that team, with much commitment from the chief of the veterinary service because this requires the participation of the entire unit. It has to be very well led. This multidisciplinary team needs to have people from epidemiological surveillance, from quarantine, from the lab, because we're looking at different measures in different ways. It has to have the participation of people in charge of planning. This is not just matter of going in and out. It's not that I get together, I do a workshop and brings the FAO or some expert. No, no. This is a work by the service where on the one hand, they need to identify the gaps that I have to look at to improve and also improve the assessment itself. I will assess my risk in a better way and I look at the gaps and where I need to improve the mitigation to be more efficient. That's the work that the veterinary service should undertake. And also to have external support from universities, of course, because there are many technical questions that need to be answered, to be able to look at the standards of the measures and look at the risks in a better way, to do better cutoff points, and of course, international organizations, and also to be able to generate the new measures. I'm sorry, something's wrong there. So, also, we have the participation of the private sector. Many of the measures are executed by the private sector. So, this assessment needs to be carried out thoroughly. And so, what is the projection of this work? First, this work allows you to plan improvements in a better way. Each country can look at what things they need to improve their prevention. They need to look at the economic and technical aspects as well. So they need to choose, do I do A or I do B? Do I use dogs or I do use a scanner? So we need to decide what to do and how to assess that measure. And then we have some measures that are more critical than others because we're closer to this to the outbreak or the source of infection. And then we have the description of critical measures and then the definition and the follow-up. And when I have a critical measure, I need to know if this is working well. It's like HACCP in processing plants. I need to identify these critical measures and assess them. And the incorporation of uncertainty and risk perception that is included. And then we have risk assessment or unit or the assessment by risk unit, which is very, very good, as I explained, and the incorporation of new risk and to assess them and follow them up. The improvement, progressive improvement of the risk assessment allows you to have a better tool too. So this is the summary of the tool taken from reality. We have worked with every single country in the region, countries that are more advanced or others that are more in development with very complex systems and also some very complex pig production systems. What happened to the Dominican Republic is a great example or lesson of how complex production chains can be with many backyard, very lots of informality, and you need to inform yourself very well to have these preventive mitigation measures in place. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. So thank you, Dr. Hernan Rojas, for your presentation. I think all these tools that we are listening about today are very, very useful, and we need to make sure countries use this rapid risk assessments, maybe not one that is too long, but something fast that helps us mitigate risks and other measures, as mentioned by Dr. Rojas, that need to be fixed to avoid the entry of new diseases, such as ASF, like in the case of all the countries that are outside the Española, and also the amendment of the measures or the improvement of the measures to avoid things from spreading. So thank you very much. Our presentation was very good. And now we are gonna wait for we're gonna wait for the Q&A session to answer any questions people may have, which we know are a lot. So now we're gonna we're gonna make a quick change in the agenda because Hernan just talked about the FAO's tool and that they have applied in the Dominican Republic. So in order to have something following up better in a better way, we're gonna now listen to Dr. Diego Rojas Morea. Before that, I'm going to introduce him briefly. He is the National Coordinator of the Swine Biosecurity Project for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in the Dominican Republic, as well as the Coordinator of Health Programs for FAO in the Dominican Republic. He holds a master's degree in animal and veterinary sciences from the University of Chile, a specialization in epidemiology from the University of Rosario, and a specialization in management from the External University. He has more than 20 years of experience in health program management in countries such as Colombia, where he was director of the classical swine fever eradication program in Colombia, deputy manager of border protection at the ICA, and international consultant of entities such as FAO and OIRSA on health management and risk management in countries such as Guatemala, Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Belize, and the Dominican Republic. With that, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Diego so he can tell us about his experience in the Dominican Republic. So thank you very much, Erika. Good morning to all the colleagues who are connected today in this webinar. I would like to know if you can hear me okay and see my presentation. Yes, we can. Thank you, doctor. Well, thank you very much. Well, the topics that we will address during my presentation mainly deal with the risk in the context of ASF, the impact of ASF in the world, also the importance of biosecurity, and what has been the experience in the implementation of the National Biosecurity Program in the Dominican Republic as a risk management tool to mitigate the impact of this disease, which without a doubt is of much concern to the entire American continent. And we are also going to talk about some anthropology and health topics and how the interaction, acting of human beings is highly related to the how diseases move throughout populations. So this is a short video, introductory video that I want you to hear. I don't know if you can hear it. No, we cannot hear it. It's okay. Well, at least you can watch it. You can look at what it shows. So this video gives us an idea of the concept of risk. Sometimes diseases, in my disease, come in two or four legs, come in two or four legs. And despite the good strategies, mitigation strategies and tools and measures that may be in place for early alert, sometimes people who work in the borders, airports, and other places might actually introduce it. So there's no zero risk. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, particularly in the context of ASF. And I would like to start talking about what is risk in the context of ASF, what we call risk there. From the epidemiological standpoint, risk is the probability by impact. Now, in the case of ASF, it talks about the risk of ASF infection or outbreak on a pig farm. And There we move on to probability because we are talking about the probability of impact. And that has to do with at least one pig ASF positive on a pig farm. And if we have a disease such as ASF entering our countries, it has some direct and indirect consequences at the physical, economic, and social level because of the death of animals, because of the closing of markets, because of the economic impact that countries may suffer. Dominican Republic, for example, pork is the second most consumed meat, and so it had a great impact within its agricultural and livestock sector. So, what does the probability of ASF entry into farms depend on? Into farms or into countries depend on? Well, depends from the population, from risk population, farms and animals. Francisco made a great presentation on how ASF looked like in Europe, and that is associated to wild boars and how they have interaction with backyard and hunters, backyard farms and hunters. And so the Dominican Republic's context is different because there are no wild boars, but when you look at it closely, we need to look at how it enters, and you need to look at the different cycles of the disease. In the case of Africa, it's related to the life cycle of the virus and in ticks. So it would all depend on where this disease is presenting itself in the world and how I carry out the risk analysis of populations, farms, and animals. From the situation, epidemiological situation, frequency allocation of outbreaks, if we see those in backyard farms or in technified commercial farms, if they are associated to slaughterhouses, municipal slaughterhouses that have no control, veterinary control or inspection, or if they are occurring in slaughterhouses with official control. So this is are all analysis that we need to carry out. Also, if we have the disease already endemically, also from chain structure and risk flows. The value chain is very robust, it's very big, and we have different parts in that chain. We have the balanced food producing companies, foods, all the transportation to the slaughterhouse, and then to where the products are prepared, and the value chain ends up in the supermarkets or the butcher shops or in chains and restaurants. So sometimes we look at how we use will and all its negative impact in the handling of this disease. Also, from the measures of detection measures and surveillance or early detection. So, what measures are established in place to mitigate the risk through scanners, through canine brigades, through profiling of travelers? What is being done at ports and airports to control international trash? What different active surveillance methods we have in at borders with neighboring countries? So everything that was explained by Hernan will add up in this mitigation or likelihood of entry of a disease such as ASF. Now, from biosecurity measures, today, a country such as the Dominican Republic and other countries like Vietnam that has similar cases that have biosecurity measures, how these biosecurity measures have an impact in a positive impact in the prevention and mitigation of risk for the introduction of ASF in the farms, and also compensation mechanisms that are a tool that allow at the beginning of any outbreak to control things and make sure that people are motivated to do the official noticing and act promptly faced with a health crisis. or emergency. So what has happened in the Dominican Republic? We, on July 29th this year, it's going to be 4 years of the first initial official report after many years had gone by without an outbreak. So eventually, the first outbreak was eradicated, but 4 years ago, the second report of an outbreak was reported at WOAH, first at Monte Cristi, the northern border with Haiti, and towards the middle of the country in in the municipality of Cotuí. And of course, this led to a health emergency and for all alerts to be raised with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the support of the international organizations, the veterinarian services, FAO, ICA, UIRSA, and the government of the United States to activate a disease control program. So this disease is now considered endemic in the Dominican Republic. And Iran explained this very clearly. And I'm talking about the Dominican Republic, but they also share the territory with Haiti. But we don't have any information from Haiti. The situation in Haiti is very complicated politically and socially. So that leads to not having information from them. But in the Dominican Republic, we have been doing a very thorough work in trying to control the disease. And despite all the different efforts, we control mobilization, care of different hotspots and everything, it's still the value chain makes it very complicated to control and eradicate the disease. Positive cases have been reduced or decreasing throughout the years. You can look at the graph as you can see it very clearly, but obviously we still have some active cases of the disease, particularly in some cases where there's a high concentration of pigs. And here in the Dominican Republic, we have that characteristic. Over 75–80% of the farms have less than 50 animals, where they concentrate most of the population, either backyard farms with a mobilization that is quite active of animals that may be moved from one place to another, with slaughter of the animals in the backyards of houses. So that definitely has a high impact on control and eradication of the disease. Now, how can we prevent and work towards preventing the entry risk? So through biosecurity. And here we have two basic concepts. First, we have bioexclusion. How can I prevent from the outside? And how can I establish control measures that may prevent the entry of the disease to my farm? How can I control that? And where am I bringing the new animals from? The sows, the older sows. I establish a good quarantine before they come into the farm. I do my serologic controls to make sure the ASF is not coming into my farm. And also through biocompensation, I see how, well, biocontainment, I prevent the disease from moving to other farms. So aside from active surveillance, which is truly, truly, truly important. And so this is my call to all veterinary services to work together and establish active surveillance systems. I know that many veterinary systems, because I work in veterinary systems as well for many years, they usually do passive surveillance, but I think we need to innovate and break free from that to active surveillance. Make sure that we have more information, more data, so that we can have a better analysis and make better decisions, and also have bioexclusion for prevention purposes. And of course, here we also talked about biocontention. I have already explained that. What do I do within my farm to prevent diseases from exiting? And what consequences do we have? What are the consequences of increased risk? Well, it is more difficult to control and eradicate the disease once the disease is already inside a country. Here we have information from the economic impact of ASF in the Dominican Republic. They have spent around $50 million in this process. The reduction of almost 60, or no, 40% of the pig population, This was a big impact on productivity and the economy of this livestock production sector. And there is a decrease in the consumption of high quality uh, uh, protein. So it's more resource competition, more difficult to make it efficient. We will always need more and more and more resources, the loss of markets, because everybody knows that this is a disease that limits international trade, pig meat and other byproducts. So this has an impact on exporting countries of pork. Then higher insurance requirements. If we want to look at the possibility of establishing an insurance against uh, swine diseases, well, for the countries who have the disease are going to have it tougher to develop obtain this insurance, and they are going to be more expensive and harder to get. Then the probability of entry and frequency is going to increase. Then the larger, the more the consequences is the maximum possible loss, and the population exposed, depending on the characteristics of the population, there will be a higher impact, right? If you have more or smaller farms, there's a higher risk for spreading and exposure to the disease. And this is very important to keep in mind, particularly when you look at contingencies in different steps. And so I want to show you in terms of time. The more time, the greater the consequences. The more I take to adopt measures to detect the disease or to confirm the disease, to slaughter the animal and do the right intervention, that will definitely uh, increase the consequences. So you need to have a good synergy among countries, and countries need to be ready with their contingency plans. They need to have their laboratories ready, have the adequate techniques, standardized techniques, and have all the primers and all the kits needed to be able to carry out an efficient diagnostic. And the less you take in detecting, the easier it's going to be for you to uh, control the disease and eradicate it. So the greater the time you take, the greater the economic impact, social impact, and in health.
We will see the impact of African swine fever from 2021 in Vietnam as to the economic impact of African swine fever in that country. It entered in 2019 and it basically depleted the swine population at about 20%, basically affecting the backyard producers. Basically, the large swine and commercial swine growers have implemented a series of biosafety mechanisms that will have allowed them continue to support the market. A lot of pork is consumed in Vietnam, and this has affected basically the national GDP, basically reduced in 1.8%. It was a tremendous impact on the economy of the country. In another study carried out estimating the cost of African swine fever in the Dominican Republic, we can see that that as part of the results of the study, we saw that those farms that implement biosafety measures, the farms that do not have the biosafety measures have 2 to 5 times more likelihood of being positive to African swine fever. And here we see measures like the perimeter and control of access. These are measures implemented with greater frequency in those farms that have a lesser proportion of African swine fever in the Dominican Republic. And we will see this a little later on when I explain how the national biosafety program has been implemented. This is another recently published document, 2025, in fact, establishing the risk of the entry of African swine fever in Latin America and the Caribbean, providing there are two pathways for the entry of the virus into the Africa. One are informal uh, uh, imports through travelers, illegal migrants, and wastes of aircraft and airplane and ships. And the other one is illegal imports. And here we have shipping and non-regulated migration. This is no secret that there is a migration from South to North America, coming from Colombia up through Panama up to the United States, the contraband of swine products, massive tourism and contaminated waste, migratory flows in Darien. These are practical examples. And here they establish pathways both through formal imports as well as informal imports, and the probability of African swine fever coming into the country. And here we have 4 or 5 different countries with a greater probability, with a medium level of certainty: Colombia, Mexico, Panama, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. That is, here we must focus all the interest to mitigate and establish early warning systems that will allow us to reduce that probability of entry of the disease. And as the major conclusion of the study, they recommend to strengthen regional collaboration, epidemiological surveillance, and exchange of sanitary data. And the publication of results is very important in all of this to control and prevention of this disease. Now, what is the importance of biosafety itself as a tool for mitigation to the entry of African swine fever into our establishments? Well, it protects animal health, no doubt. This is a tool that is there, that needs to be used, and that is perhaps the most important tool at this time that countries have available. The endemic countries and non-endemic countries have to prevent the entry because it protects the investment. I mean, the swine farmers, I mean, these are sometimes family operations, but the family's economy depends on that. And it also protects the supply of food products and human health. This is very important for the FAA to fight zero hunger in all programs that we have according to the Sustainable Development Goals, and obviously to maintain the safety at and good health at the farms. Hernan explained the context of the value chain very clearly. This is a very practical example of how each link in the chain intervenes in the production system and how the transformation is related. For example, when we see the manufacturing of the balanced feed, its transportation to the farms, how on the farms we can establish measures that mitigate that risk with adequate cleanliness systems, and how to establish mechanisms that will allow us to adequately take the animals to the slaughterhouse, and how we prevent that a contaminated truck comes back to the farm. So what strategies are established by the carriers and the slaughterhouses themselves to prevent any impact or risk of the disease through effluents and organic waste generated in the slaughter process, and how after that the exposed the marketing of retailers, hotels, households, and how we ensure that those wastes from hotels, for example, do not end up coming back into the swine production process as swill. So we must be very creative here. Nang was explaining, and this is very true in Latin America. We have all kinds of laws, and if we ask in the countries, in basically human wastes are prohibited as for to feed animals, but for small growers, that's basically the only reality they have. So we have to define mechanisms or strategies to mitigate that risk by teaching them how to cook it for cook those wastes for a given time frame. This is very important to mention clearly. Now, what is biosafety all about? Well, we must clearly understand it as a series of measures aimed at protecting the protection of the farms, minimizing the risk of introduction and spread of diseases present on a farm. Now, what really works? There's a very interesting social component here, a sociological component. Many of the producers believe they meet the biosafety measures. They feel they are doing things right. But when we go and see these places, well, we see a series of errors, and they come into the farms with their own vehicles, and they get out of the car with their pets and let them run around. And this is among many other activities, and it is very important there to create this awareness talk from the psychological biosecurity to biosafety to do effective biosafety so that it can become in that corporate air or environment within the organizations and swine farmers without regardless of the size. I could have 1, 2, 3 sows or 20,000 sows. It is exactly the same biosafety measure. Zero tolerance. There's non-negotiables here. Basically, what is the objective? It is to cut off that transmission chain. So we have been working in collaboration in the Dominican Republic that arose from the emergency 4 years ago, where the Ministry of Agriculture and the Directorate of General of Livestock and FAO and the support of the USDA and the swine growers basically made things become a reality. So we have been making a big change. That is why I was mentioning the sociological importance. Biosafety demands modifying strongly rooted cultural practices. Oftentimes we come across producers that have been doing exactly the same thing for 80 years ago because that is what their grandfather did and their father did. Okay, we face in all Latin American countries with that type of behavior. So that is where we need to persevere, provide a lot of training for those growers and to change the chip of the production method. This obviously generates a certain tension between tradition and technological standards. There's big clash here because, well, I have been doing things this way for so many years. But then they come across the reality of the sanitary reality of African swine fever. So we need to change we require continuous education. We have been working, as Hernan was saying, aside from working on the outreach regarding African swine fever, the economic impact of measures, the impact of the disease is the best driver of change in behavior. Not until they are exposed to a given situation or it affects them directly, then that triggers an important social behavior change. Basically, we cover the entire territory in the Dominican Republic. We have trained more than 5,000 people in biosafety in the Dominican Republic in all provinces. Currently, we have a virtual biosafety course. This is an open course. Anyone can take it. This is on the FAO campus website. More than 2,072 people have taken this course. At any point in time, this is certifiable, easy to understand. It is very easy to understand, and you can become certified in the basic concepts of biosafety. Diego, 5 more minutes. Okay, fine. In the Dominican Republic, we have a model to apply to enforce the biosafety program. We have a series of highly trained veterinarians that visit the farms, and there's a checklist there. These are a series of 17 criteria we evaluate. We have a quantifiable checklist. Currently, there are 625 producers registered. More than 360,000 animals are part of the program. Each one of these bars here symbolizes each of the farm, and we can see that 70% is the minimum score.
Para poder certificarse como predios bioseguros.
And there are 11 non-negotiable variables that need to be met. This shows how we have improved ever since the program started 2 years ago and the progress. Notice 85% growth in each of the criteria assessed: location of the farm, the establishment of entry control measures, improving facilities, establishment of cleaning and disinfection methods. We have certified 17 farms. These are just some images of how the farms in the DR have been improving over time thanks to the program. And in ending, anthropology and safety. Why do some producers respond, others not? Well, access to training is fundamental. The integration into value chains and factors that limit adoption, misinformation, distrust, lack of resources, traditional non-biosafety compatible practices. We have already mentioned this. Allow me to end very quickly with this. Sociological challenges. There is cultural reluctance to change in agricultural practices. The lack of technical understanding and access to information leads to rejection. The role of gender and family hierarchy in decision making, the lack of training in campaigns. As final comments, and in ending now, African swine fever has not left. It continues to be present. It is a permanent threat, and we need to protect ourselves. This is a message for everyone, all convicts throughout the continent that are taking this course. We need to work in collaboration among countries and institutions to prevent, monitor, and communicate risk in the region. The union makes us stronger. We must work in coordination with producers and institutions to work on prevention in the countries that still do not have it, and those that do have it, well, can continue working on eradication. Border crossings must be strengthened, and active surveillance must be implemented. Biosafety is perhaps the most effective prevention measure to mitigate African swine fever. Sanitary policies must consider the cultural dimensions of risk and the complex epidemiology of African swine fever requires interventions adapted to each country. And with this, I have ended my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Diego Rojas, for the extensive information about what is underway in the Dominican Republic. It is very good to see the example. They have addressed African swine fever. We see how they have done this in the Dominican Republic, all the process underway. It is very good to use that example to be better prepared. We cannot trust that that is not going to happen to us. This is a latent risk at all times. So we must be prepared. And we must prevent this. Okay, now let us continue. Your questions will be left for the end, just as well as with the other panelists. And let us continue with the last presentation by Dr. Jose Pablo Gomez. He is a project scientist at the Modeling and Surveillance Center of Animal Diseases, USA Davis. He works on the development and implementation of modeling tools, easy to use, and of open access for surveillance and control of diseases, and support to decision making. As part of that process, Dr. Pablo uses a combination of mixed methods with methodologies in stochastic modeling and participatory modeling. Part of his previous work has been done in collaboration with government institutions and of research institutions in different countries of the Americas and Africa, and has developed modeling frameworks to support decision making regarding diseases as African swine fever, foot and mouth disease. And with this, I leave you with Dr. Gomez for him to share his experiences as to rapid risk assessment. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for the organization and the other speakers. I believe the presentations today have been very good. I would try to not repeat some of the concepts that have already been shared by my colleagues. I will talk a bit more from the academic stance. I work at the University of California, Davis, and we have been working with several countries and institutions developing tools for risk assessment. So, thinking of everything we have heard about this morning, risk assessment, if we realize it, it could become very complicated. There are so many things on the epidemiology side we have to be experts in. We must understand our population. We must in the population, I believe, there was in the previous presentation, there was a very interesting focus on this. It is not just about understanding the animal population, but also the individuals that care for those animals. And this is the part of expertise we all clearly understand, and I believe that most of you already have this expertise. But anyway, when we want to undertake an assessment like this, we will see there are other parts that we have to grab a hold of, as is statistics, for example. How do we handle probability, stochastic processes, and how do we implement all of this later? Sometimes this could look very complicated, and something that has been very clear for me from the presentations and that I have shared with the speakers is that to have a rapid risk assessment, it has to be rapid, of course, in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks or 3 or 1 month, but you need to have a starting point. You have to build veterinary services with a good source of data collection. You need to have the training in force in place. And this is the complicated part of the analysis. Okay, how do we do that part? To have that starting point so that when the emergency arises, we have a risk assessment that will not take a whole week to develop. So I would talk to you about a tool that we are using here. And I will give you an example of how we have used it. We have this tool, Quantra. The idea is to provide a structured, transparent, and scalable methodology for risk assessment, both qualitative as well as quantitative. The idea is to use Monte Carlo simulation and scenario trees to represent uncertainty, something that many have been doing already. The idea is for this to serve as a participatory and adaptive platform. One of the previous speakers mentioned that a good part of the work of risk assessment has to be headed by the veterinary service organizations. Academia could help, yes, and we can participate, but the ones that have the access to the information, they use this day by day and are familiar with this are the veterinary services. No one better than them to head this. So the idea of this platform is to try to create these bridges between the veterinary services with access to these more analytical tools. So this is developed with open code to foster free of charge use and collaborative improvement. The idea, well, this we developed. You may be familiar with this or not, but what is most important here, we have created a platform, and this does not require code. Basically, the idea is for people to use this with a user interface platform. This is a very brief example. This is my console here you are seeing, but the idea is for us to have the ability to upload our tables and our scenario trees from our computer or from wherever, and we can have access to this information. Let me get ahead a bit. This is just a view. The idea is we can change the parameters to run the platform, run different types of analyses to analyze the information and how to estimate risk. Let me get ahead of here because I have further examples later. So this project, well, we have been working with this project for quite some time now, and we have developed together with several other projects underway, and with the participation of several organizations and institutions in different contexts. These are some of the institutions that have been involved in this development at some point in time, either because we have developed projects with them, or some have provided funding or other types of expertise. These are some of the examples we have. This one here, this one to the left side of the screen, is the one we developed together with the veterinary services in Mexico, Senacica, with funding of Procinorte. And this is a platform for the rapid risk assessment. So the idea is that with this platform, once it is set up and developed, the veterinary service can update it continuously, because I believe one of the most important things of risk assessment is that we have a starting point once we finish our analysis, and then the next time we have to analyze something or assess something, well, all we have to do is just update the figures. But so, and that is much easier. That is the only way, basically, we can have reduce 1 week or 2 weeks for an assessment. But the starting point is what is basic here. So basically, that is the objective of building this infrastructure for the veterinary services and have the platform ready that they can use and update without needing to resort to the academia or anyone from a specialist in programming. And here's another example before I go into greater detail to show how these applications have been extended to other things like food security also, and we can integrate maps and things like that. The idea of this tool, or this part I want to explain about risk assessment, is either with this tool or any other tool, but I believe the general objective of this type of assessment is it shows you how to execute risk simulations and try to adapt it to different qualitative, quantitative parameters and probability distributions. Visualization is always important to share results and compare these for risk management purposes. And in the tool specifically, we are trying to do this process, which is so important, to document everything and store these scenarios so that next time we undertake an assessment, either ourselves or someone else, this can serve as a starting point and it makes it easier for the next time. This is the operating flow we are using. The idea is first to create a risk model. These are the scenario trees that I know many of you have already seen. This is an example, is for ASF. And in this process, we developed the parameters. This is another process that I could explain in greater detail later if necessary. But the idea is that, well, we use the Excel files for all of this. And this we upload on the platform, and depending on how we define the model, we can do it either qualitative or quantitative. One of the ideas here of our work underway is that all these processes be stored in an Excel file, and with that, we can build our model library and store all those scenarios so that the next time we have to use them, or for the next assessment, we already have that starting point without needing to start from scratch. This tool we developed does certain things throughout the process. There are some parts that are still very important to examine in greater detail. And that is based on the experience, the expertise of the people at the veterinary services. It is important to have this collaboration from the people from academia and from the veterinary services. For example, some of the things that are still very important to do and that this tool does not do is the conceptual design of the model. Oftentimes, this process calls us to get together with experts to develop the decision trees or the scenario trees. And sometimes we want to do that very quickly because if in an emergency, you don't really have that time. But that is why it is so important to have to develop this when there is no emergency, so that when an emergency arises, we already have that started and it is easier to implement. Preparation and validation of data. Well, this is another point that we clearly understand. For a rapid risk assessment, we need to have this part worked on in advance. Preparation, data preparation and validation. Oftentimes we have a data collection system and we are collecting data, but they're just sitting there and we're not doing anything with that. So it is very important to work on the data and have them in an organized manner. So once we need to undertake a rapid risk assessment in an emergency, it does not take us a long time. This could really take a long time, months and months and months to work out all the data. Interpretation of the results, well, this has to be analyzed by specialized staff. And I believe that most of the people here very well have a lot of the skills for this interpretation once the results. So it is important to have these discussions, preferably in a group. And we need the determination of health policies, also sanitary policies. Risk assessment will only reflect the technical scenarios and should not be used as an automatic basis to restrict trade, close borders, or point at individual actors. The idea is that these assessments will help us analyze the rest of the information that we have, which is a bit more qualitative, to understand the historical context of the disease or the situation of the country. The assessment in itself is only a supporting tool. So here, allow me to share an example of an assessment we undertook for the introduction of African swine fever with the veterinary service in Mexico, Senacica. And the idea of this project is to design this tool, an analysis for the probability of introduction of ASF with the different routes of origin and the different types of goods. Just to give you an idea of what the initial process is like, well, we define basically the scenario trees, the decision trees, what areas will we cover. In very general terms, we are trying to cover the possibility of a contaminated product entering the countries. And some of the considerations we include is, for example, how many migrants will enter into the country, the proportion of illegal goods being introduced, the number of products introduced, the capability of detection at origin, and other things like that, that I cannot explain in greater detail now. But one thing I would like to highlight is that, for example, some of these things we list here is because the database was already there. It had already been established. Many veterinary services gather information as to the types of products that are being introduced illegally at airports and ports. And with that information, we can have a clearer and more concrete view of our analysis. So that is why it is so important to try to do all this work, so that when we do have to take steps, we have the information available and included in the model. And the same, we have other information, the number of products introduced, the type of product, country of origin, and all of that.
Just to give you more details on the models, for many things such as likelihood of ASF in origin and detection in origin, we use what was recommended by WH, which are the most available data. Sometimes countries may have more detailed information about the situation, but just to make it more generalized, and we are using information from WOAH, such as the health status of ASF per country, and also something else that we're integrating here are which are the strategies and actions adopted by the veterinary services in each country. Many of you are probably familiarized with these databases. Many of these databases tell you what type of services, surveillance services they have, if it's active or passive, if they're sampling, just to look at the infrastructure of laboratories and veterinary services. So it can be more detailed, but with this information, which is the available information, is something that we can generalize also for other countries. The idea with this is to establish parameters and distributions. I'm not going to go into detail here, but the idea with this is to establish the likelihood of an outbreak in origin that has not been detected yet. And so if we were to look at the things that are being imported by country, we can realize that they're coming from countries that do not have the disease. So oftentimes things come from places that are disease free. But if we were to do a risk analysis, we can say, like, no, we're not importing from any countries that have the disease, or our likelihood is zero. And the analysis is finished there. No, but the idea here is for us to catch the uncertainty and say which is the likelihood, even though it's not reported, what is the likelihood of the disease to be undetected. And most of the times it's going to go very well because most countries report that they do have health services, that they have good surveillance systems. But here the main point is that we need to use this tool to assess those scenarios and try to see whether, even if they don't have a high likelihood or probability, at least these are the ones that we need to prioritize in terms of surveillance. And this is where I explain what type of information we have to gather. Many of these, as you know, are available in the country that is running the analysis. Sometimes we need to purge the information or adapt it to our model, but here we use information from imported legal goods, and then also seized goods that oftentimes we don't have them by country, or sometimes they're hard to find. But if we have them, and then this would just make sure we have all the information we need for the analysis. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'm going to show you what the data looks like. Here we have country of origin, date, ports, type of goods, quantity, etc. Normally, we use information from immigration, and we do a normalization or standardization procedure on them. And the idea of this model is to integrate this with the information from survival of the disease in goods, because what we want is to attain a score of risk. So sometimes we need to do looking at the scientific literature or ask the experts. This is the same. And one of the things that I would like to clarify here is that this process requires the integration of different sources of information. For example, for some of the processes, we're using data gathered by the country. For other processes, we're using the literature, scientific literature available. And for the others, we're using the opinion of experts. So one of the most valuable things of running this analysis is that we can integrate data from different sources and different nature. We can get data, for example, tables, and we can have the historical data, for example, what we have by country. Or sometimes we have a number of activities where we gather experts and we run a panel discussion or we have other types of ways to ask in the opinion of experts via surveys. For example, for this one, we run a survey with 158 experts and regarding destination and the origin of products, and we integrated this in the model. And just for you to have an idea, I'm not going to share the specific results, but the idea is to show you what the platform looks like. This is how the outcomes are presented. Here we have the flow of imports from origin to destination, where they're coming from, which are, if there's a intermediary country, and where it gets to the destination country. And this platform is meant to be used by veterinary services so that they can update the information with new data. And then this can give you a view of the period that you selected, of what's the entry of goods, what are different types of goods that are being imported, and it generates an estimate of risk, qualitative or quantitative, and which are the main countries. And almost to conclude, I just want to mention that much of this work, the most interesting part and the most visible part of this work is the 7 or 20 days that it takes you to do the rapid risk analysis. But you need, before this, much work, meetings, trainings, veterinary services, and for this database to be built so that when we do the rapid risk analysis, if we want to have it done by a month, we can have all the databases in place so that this can be done. So much of this work entailed visits, or maybe they come to us for some training, or we visit them in their places, and we have trained the trainers. We give them their perspective from the academia. We work with the veterinary services, and the idea is for veterinary services allow us to implement something that they suggest to us, or we give them the tools so that they can train their people in a more horizontal manner. For example, this picture here, they're training veterinarians that work in the field. They are looking at the things that they are actually seeing out there. And so, as academia people, sometimes we cannot reach many, but if we work with veterinary services, then they can train other people, and we can have the integration of those who are working in the field as well. And so, here, this is my contact information, and that's all that I wanted to share today with you. So thank you very much, Dr. Gomez. Excellent. All these presentations are really useful because we want to show people that there are tools out there, that there are options, that it is necessary for countries to get trained and develop their risk analysis, rapid risk analysis, in order to correct or amend actions or prevent the entry of diseases or mitigate those diseases. So, in the case of African swine fever, which is the topic in these webinars, the idea is to try to prepare ourselves in the best way possible. Look at the risks, the entry risks, the risk in the biosecurity of our farms. So, I think that this rapid risk analysis are very, very effective, very important, and they also justify the figures we're showing to our decision makers because we give them hard facts. So the idea is to urge people to use these tools. And I would like to thank all the panel members for their wonderful presentations, for showing us their experience and everything they're doing. And we know that we have these possibilities in our countries. Before moving on to the Q&A session, and we're running a bit behind schedule, I wouldn't like to go without saying that we have the participation of the Minister of SINASAC in Bolivia. We have Senasa from Peru. We have people from Colombia, ICA in Colombia, ICA. We have the Livestock Committee of Sinaloa. We have Carne San Alejo from Colombia. We also have INMIMA from Colombia, the Ministry of Livestock and Fishery of Uruguay, the Ministry of Agriculture in Jamaica. We have the National Program for Risk Analysis from Costa Rica. We have the Ministry of Agriculture of Haiti. We have FONCODES in Peru, Todo Cerdo from Paraguay. We also have the participation of the Ministry of Agriculture from Anguille and Feed Latina joining us as well. We have Belize, the Veterinary Services. So as you can see, the public of these webinars is quite varied. We have the participation of private sector and the public sector as well, and this is the perfect combination. We also have the participation from academia. So I believe this is important not only in terms of risk analysis, but this is also something that needs to be developed in a comprehensive manner. It's the only way to mitigate and prevent these diseases in our countries. I would not like to leave out the fact that we have access to all these webinars via the platform that we have. You have all the webinars available there, all the webinars we have had so far. So we will leave you in the chat the link for the platform. And please remind you to fill the survey. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A session. Maybe Dr. Campuzano can help me ask the questions and Dr. Katia Martinez as well. So let's begin with the first question, and then we're going to listen to Dr. Campuzano Martinez, and then we'll take turns so that you do not only listen to my voice. So the first question is for Dr. Calvo by Carolina Eulogio. She says, good morning. I would like to know how you update the genetics of your animals and if it's important to take into consideration live animals. Well, we do not import live animals. We have nuclei farms that produce the genetics in Denmark. Dr. Campuzano, go ahead. Thank you. Another question for Dr. Calvo from Michelle Jasper. What happens if the data to gather are limited or inexistent? How do you update your report? Is it a high risk level? Well, I think that my colleagues here have also talked about this. If we do not have the information, the data, at the beginning of all this process, what we need to do is work together. First of all, identify the risk pathways of entry, do the scenario trees, and through the scenario trees, we will be able to visualize the different steps, logic steps. The pathogen can actually enter our country, our population, our susceptible population, and be able to identify which is the data that we need, which are the gaps of information. And if we do not have that information, then we need to look for help from the experts and look for the information in scientific literature, look for data from international organizations like WOAH, because if we do not have the data, we cannot do the risk analysis. But the important part here is to identify the process for risk pathway, do the scenario trees, and see where the information is missing. And this type of training for the identification of risk pathways and developing of scenario trees is very important to be addressed with our colleagues from animal health and also veterinary services, because in regions they have lots of local information what the situation is, and they can also detect some risk pathways. We need to identify also where more data is needed. So at the beginning, if you don't have the data, you cannot do the risk analysis. We agree on that. But even so, you can start with the process, with the identification of risk pathways and the development of scenario trees, and then identify who we need to ask for information. Yes, thank you, Doctor. Dr. Katia. Hello, good morning, everybody. It's very nice to greet all of you. I believe we still have more questions for you. What recommendations would you give for those countries that just want to incorporate this methodology? And what are the requirements needed to include it as a tool for the decision-making process? Well, the experience that we have had or we have gathered through these reports is quite successful. After all the years we have carried out, these reports are already standardized, this rapid risk assessment. We have had we have worked closely with the university, with the academia, as mentioned by Dr. Jose Gomez. Working with the academia, the government, and the industry to be able to develop these data banks, identifying all the risk pathways is truly important. So if we still have not implement them, where should we begin with? Well, identify what data we have, identify who needs to become involved in this work. I believe it is important to have the academia involved, but also to have official services involved in all of this risk assessment and risk pathways assessment. It is important to understand how it is done. For example, the tool introduced to us by Dr. Gomez is a very important one, but we also need to understand how to interpret those outcomes. How are we going to use the report? Like, for example, the report that we develop in Denmark. How are we going to convey the information so the decisions are made? So it's important to have that kind of training as well, to understand how to do the risk analysis, understand how to identify risk pathways, how to do scenario trees, how to read a scenario tree. So it is very important to start with this work, an interdisciplinary work between different parties, the government, academia, and the private sector. Thank you. Perfect, Dr. Calvo. Next question is also for you by Michelle Jasper. And she asks regarding the rapid risk assessment for a country during an outbreak. How can a report be drafted if at the time of the outbreak the information required are quite limited or inexistent? Is this established as a high risk because of the lack of data? Let me see if I understood the question. So the rapid risk assessment will not be carried out if I do not have an outbreak in my country first. So we implement it here in Denmark because there is a risk, because there was an ASF outbreak in Germany or an ASF outbreak in Sweden, like a couple of years ago, where they had the introduction in wild boar. So for us, that was a risk. And so we immediately wrote the draft or the report. So I'm going to develop this report because there is a crisis. Now, if I identify that I do not have any data, then I have to contact experts. I have to look for information, scientific information. If I do not have the data in my country, then I need to get in touch with people from other countries who may have more data. So I think, I don't know which of the panel members said something very important. I believe that, I think it was Ricardo Rojas, Dr. Ricardo Rojas. In one of the studies, one of the outcomes of the conclusions was that regional cooperation should be developed and data, information needs to be shared. That is totally important. That is how we can then see what is the likelihood for the introduction of the disease. Yes, thank you very much. This is for Dr. Hernan Rojas. Considering that a country does have good to excellent information on this swine disease, how long does it take to do this risk analysis? Okay, my colleagues probably can answer this question as well because it's quite a common question. Well, first of all, we still have 140 people listening to us. So, risk analysis is a tool to make decisions. And decisions at a veterinary service, let's think about a veterinary service from any country in the Americas. And I do respect and admire Denmark greatly. But let's think about Latin America. Let's think the Americas and the Caribbean now. Decisions need to be adopted based on the information that you have because you need to do things. You need to make a decision anyhow. So, risk assessment, the depth of the risk assessment and the quality of the risk assessment will be based on the possibility to carry out such analysis and two of the decision I need to make. So, of course, I could do a risk analysis like the one presented here, which are rapid, and that will depend on the quality of information that I have. Let's say you have good information, but we'll have to see. Depends on what is all the information. For Latin America, one of the complexities is that maybe there's some sort of information available, but other is not. And I'm telling you this because I know what I'm talking about. We did some flows and chain and measure search for information in the entire region, and we looked at all the deficiencies that exist. But the decisions still need to be made because the minister is still going to ask the lead of the veterinary services, what do we do? Because we have an imminent risk and we need to make a decision. And the most structured and least structured veterinary services still have to do the risk analysis to see how and where this is going to happen, the highest likelihood, and make a decision to prevent it. So, to answer your question concretely, it depends. Depends on what it means to have all the information, because maybe some sort of information is available, but others not. And it also depends on the decision you need to make. Sometimes you need to do a rapid analysis in a couple of days or a week or a couple of weeks, and you still need to do it. So, the most valuable thing of this conversation is that each country, and this is my main recommendation, each country needs to have a method to be able to carry out this exercise in a regular manner, because you will always have to run risk analysis for a number of decisions that need to be made. Here, we're focusing on ASF, and which is a threat, depending on our countries, for a long time. And so I don't know what country you're asking me from, but my answer is it depends. It depends, but everybody needs to be ready to have a precise method to use the information you have to make a decision. Thank you, doctor. Go ahead, Dr. Martinez. Okay, I'm going to put two questions together for Dr. Hernan. And I'm combining these two questions because these are related issues. What suggestions could you give us for veterinary services and the private sector for the implementation of this methodology? And the second question is there any kind of manual or tool that can be used to apply everything that has to do with risk mitigation analysis? I'm sorry, Katia. Nice to greet you, Katia. I'm sorry. The first question, I didn't understand it. So what suggestions could you give veterinary services and the private sector with regards to the implementation of the methodology that you explained? Well, first, and I insist, and I say that with much love. First is for veterinary services to allocate time to do this. It's not like having a workshop in the morning and then forget about it. No, this is a systematic, ongoing work carried out by the veterinary services in a comprehensive manner. It cannot just be the surveillance unit or the risk analysis unit or quarantine unit. You need to take into consideration the regions. You need to develop a team with a very good leader and have ongoing work to be able to be aware that you need to move forward progressively and develop a method to guide the improvement of the prevention and preparation method to an emergency. That would be the first recommendation. And this dialogue should also be held with the private sector because, as I said before, first, risk assessment, and Francisco said this too, to have a better assessment, I need to do things quickly. I need to know how things work, how the truck moves, what is my level of biosecurity, how is meat moved. So I need to be able to map the flows very quickly. And secondly, as we mentioned before too, we need to focus on the management. Much of the management is done privately, it's not by the veterinary services. So much of the work, particularly in terms of biosecurity, as Diego was saying, is private. And I'm not talking about only biosecurity of the farms, but also all the components of the chain where animals and food and still is moved. And so the second part of your question is as well as the second part is we have all the methodology written, but we are open if any country wants to work and for us to show the veterinary services in the private sector details of the methodology and you want to test it, as FAO, we are always available to do this. Okay? Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Hernan.
And
Next question for
we have a
Dr.
question
Diego
for Diego
Rojas.
Rojas by Dr. Arce.
Greetings.
When we do
Biosafety efforts in the Dominican Republic
efforts in the Dominican Republic,
have they protected from the infection?
thank you for the question and greetings to the doctor. The program is meant for technified producers, backyard producers, and mid-level producers. We are aware that there's a niche of transmission there that is high. So the program is also meant for the strengthening of commercial farms. They receive permanent guidance through veterinary doctors who are part of the program, and they also get help from some biosecurity kits that we have. But definitely, we do help technified farms.
Gracias. Adelante, doctora Campuzano.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Campuzano. Yes, for you, Dr. Diego, also. There's a question here. What mechanisms have been implemented in the DR to uh, basically to protect, to strengthen the biosafety of these farms? Do you believe that is effective since on the rest of the island sanitary measures cannot necessarily be implemented? What measures have been implemented regarding the existence of Pharaoh's swine in the Dominican Republic? Good question. Yes. Well, perhaps I was unable to elaborate on this during my presentation, but there are 17 assessment criteria. Among these, the entry onto the farm and proximity to other swine farms or poultry farms and landfills, what have you. All the protocols on disinfection and washing. There's a whole chapter on the use of overalls, boots, and all the protocols to entry into the farm and all the protocols for the trucks and the washing and disinfection of facilities and clothing. The rodent and fly control is very important also, and the use and what is done with drinking water for animals, how we ensure water is safe and from good sources to prevent the animals from getting ill. The disposal of carcasses and hazardous residues. There's a whole chapter also that where we cover effluents and the waste from swine, which is a big risk, and the use of veterinary registration, medication, and sanitary plans. All of this has a very important component. Another thing has to do with the employees, the workers on the farm, how we ensure that they meet the biosafety measures, that they adequately change their clothes, and where at their homes they are not in contact with other animals. So there are 17 different criteria and more than 74 different variables. This is a quantitative assessment that where we turn each criterion into a quantitative assessment and allows us to have a score, basically, and to rank each of the farms and see how each one of the farms improve in each component. So perhaps the biggest change we have had is the cultural change and how we have broken away with those paradigms to work conventionally, raising swine as had been done for years, and how they have been modernizing their production system and involving biosafety within their sanitary efforts on each farm. Thank you. Dr. Martinez. With this, we come into the last questions for Dr. Pablo Gomez. Among these, what are the main challenges you have faced when undertaking these surveys in the different countries? And the next, could there be access to the platform you presented, or are there any specific requirements for the country to have access to that platform? Okay, very interesting question. Yes. To respond the first one, as my colleagues were mentioning, and based on their questions, I believe that one of the main challenges is information, because there's really no way to have all the information to have all the information in the same format. Each country has different access to information and they present it differently. Their programs are different. So sometimes I believe that is one thing that we are trying to do is to contact the institutions and build based on what they are already doing instead of trying to change the systems they already have, because we know this is very difficult. This would take many years. So based on what they already have, we try to build based on that. That is the biggest challenge. In information data, access to data is always a problem. And in response to your second question, yes, this is an open source platform. Since we work in the academia, we work based on projects, etc. But we are also open to provide advice. And the idea, in the end, what we would like to do through this tool is that anyone can find a tutorial on internet. So we are working on that to make this information available for the people to use it without the need for our being there as the middle person. So my email I have added there in the chat. If someone is interested in knowing more about the platform, send me an email and I can just share those steps with you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gomez. I know there are still some hands raised, but we no longer have time. We need to end the transmission. We had a limited time frame. But in the chat, just as Dr. Gomez did, I put my email. Send us questions via email, and we will share those with the experts and share the responses with you. Without further ado, I would like to thank all the panelists for their excellent presentations. This is something that we need to examine in greater depth. We need to provide a lot of training on this matter, on rapid risk assessment, and see how we can implement these tools in the different countries. So thank you all very much, Dr. Campuzano, Dr. Martinez. Remember that every month we come up with this initiative to contact all of you. So for August, keep your eyes and ears open. We will be announcing our next webinar. Thank you all very much, Dr. Gomez, Dr. Rojas, Dr. Rojas, both Dr. Rojas and Dr. Calvo. To all of you, thank you very much. And to all participants, of course, yes, all of the participants, both from the private sector as well as from the official sector and academia, who have all joined us. And all the other colleagues from international and regional agencies that I know are connected. So thank you all very much, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye. Bye. A pleasure. See you later.